Welcome to Crypto Disrupted. I'm your host, Trent Lipinski. I'm here today with Kevin Brown from Coinage. Hey, Kevin, how's it going? Can you tell us what you're working on?
Good, good. We've got two main projects on at the moment. There's Haven, which is a stablecoin because 2018, so everybody has stablecoins, and also a medical blockchain solution that I can't dive too much into, but spending a lot of time on as well.
Nice. And so you're actually you're crypto advisory and kind of agency, correct?
Yeah, so we work with people that have ideas and mostly funding to produce blockchain solutions for them. So we bring deep technical experience to execute whatever they're trying to do from a technical perspective.
And what's your background?
So I've been writing software for about 15 years. Another partner in the business is similar. We've written software for big corporates, startups, products, kind of the whole space. And what we're liking applying our trade to now is decentralized applications. So we will figure out which bits can fit on the blockchain well and which bits are better suited to just being in a database, which bits are better elsewhere, and give you an architecture and then build that. So.
Awesome. So you're actually assisting on the development side as well as the advisory side?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're engineering background, and yeah, if you need blockchain mercenary devs, that's what we do. So.
That's funny you say that, because I kind of describe myself as a mercenary sometimes when people ask me what I do, because I kind of work similarly to an agency where I go in and consult on different projects. So yeah, I've never actually heard someone else use that term before other than myself. So I thought I was being original here.
Hey, great minds come to the same conclusion across the ocean, as it turns out. So.
I mean, that's what it kind of ends up being, though, is you're gun for hire. You come in, you solve a particular set of problems. You're very good at solving those particular set of problems, and then typically you exit. Or you have some kind of strategy where your involvement long-term is minimized, even if you still stick around in some way, shape, or form. Anyways, so what kind of ICO? So you've got these two projects you're working on now. Have you done a couple ICOs before this, or are these your two first ICOs?
We've done ICOs before this. We've been in the space kind of casually for a while, but as far as the Coinage brand goes, we've done a few ICOs this year. We've also been, some of the more interesting work to us is actually post ICO, because making a coin or a token these days is fairly straightforward. So the more interesting work to me is when people have made all sorts of promises in their white paper, they've done an ICO, they were successful, and now they're like, well, great, now I actually have to build this. And then they get very scared and find out it's actually really hard to execute a lot of the things that people are promising, and then call for help. So that's the situation that we often find ourselves in, is kind of coming in and going, okay, great. So you've got an idea, you've got a vision, there's a project, there's usually some sort of technical team in place, and we'll augment that team and or take things off their plate to keep them moving on whatever aspect. So they might be working on the core stuff and we're executing a whole bunch of stuff around the side, or the other way around, whatever makes the most sense. So we just meet our clients where they are and help them out, basically.
And so it's interesting because, you mentioned something there in your response where you were saying, how it's both hard to work on blockchain projects, and it's definitely like, if you're actually building on the blockchain, it gets complicated quickly, but actually creating coins is actually easy.
Yes.
So can you explain that to the audience?
Sure. So I recently decided it would be funny to do a bit of a joke, and I've seen artists a lot kind of complaining about being asked to do work for exposure, and that was something that I had a day or two that was free, and I went, let's. So I made an ERC token on Ethereum blockchain called Exposure, going through the process of getting it verified and so on, but it's currently on 3 exchanges, and what was really interesting about that to me was the website took about a day and a half of my time, and the actual cryptocurrency and crowd sale smart contract were leveraging OpenZeppelin code. So there's code out there that has been open sourced and audited and checked by the community, and rebuilding it yourself is a fool's game. So just use it. So I did. And
Yeah.
that's what people should be doing, is we should all be building together as a community and sharing the work. And so especially in blockchain, a lot of this tends to be open source stuff. So we should all learn from those projects. And that's been going on a while now. So there's quite a strong library of things that exist already. It starts getting tricky when you say, I want my coin to be mintable, and I want to be able to have a whitelist where it transfers. And then you start having these interacting features that you have to do. But again, you should start from a solid base and build from there rather than reinventing everything from scratch.
Yep. And I mean, ultimately, I always joke you could just go clone, a GitHub repo of Litecoin, rename a couple files within the file name, and you have your own altcoin.
Mm.
So, I mean, you can do that. That's a thing now, where you could easily just go fork an existing cryptocurrency, and that actually isn't that challenging. But then actually architecting something on the blockchain or architecting your own blockchain is a totally different task that you can't just go download a piece of code and, hit go. You actually have to do some serious software engineering. And then
Yep.
you're going into like any kind of custom consensus algorithm or
Yep.
any kind of custom consensus system. There is no like de facto standards on how to do this yet.
Yeah,
So
we've seen a few ways work. We've seen a few ways work but be weird, and then we've seen a few ways just completely not work at all. And so where we're at in this space is we're all just experimenting. And so
mhm.
where I often start is if you can leverage a platform that already exists, like an Ethereum, that can help you get a long way without having to tackle some of those really hard problems yourself. But that has its own drawbacks. So you just kind of have to come to the place with, this is what I'm trying to achieve, and here are the pros, and here are the cons, and here are 5 different solutions, and which one should we do? And usually, if somebody's at a place where they have funding and they have a vision and they know exactly what they want to achieve, then it's a lot easier. But quite often we're with clients as well that are just starting out. So then it's about trying to prove their idea more than it is about trying to build the thing that they'll necessarily be working on 3 years from now. So.
And when we were chatting a little bit before we started recording, you had mentioned something that I've also come across in my experience as well. You were saying that a lot of these ICOs and some of these projects that are coming to you don't actually need a blockchain.
Yeah, we quite often have people say, I want to put this really private, sensitive data in a public blockchain. And then I'm like, well, yeah, so you want that data to be publicly accessible forever. And they're like, no, you can encrypt it. I'm like, yeah, you can encrypt it. But then what we're saying is if anybody ever breaks that encryption for all time, then your data is accessible. That seems like a pretty juicy honeypot to me. And also, you can't exactly query the blockchain like you could a database. So let's start with, why is this not a database?
Yeah.
What does blockchain give us that a database doesn't? And for some applications, there is very much a utility that blockchain gives us that databases don't, but for many there isn't. And so for a lot of those clients, we'll say, thanks for coming and exploring. We love building decentralized things. We love the blockchain. We don't think that your idea is a fit, and we won't proceed. Yeah.
Well, sometimes, I talk pretty positively about decentralization, obviously, on the show, but sometimes when you're actually going to build something, a centralized code base and something that's been in operation that, a code structure or a database that we've been using for 15, 20, 30 years that's fully scalable and easy to implement, sometimes that is the best fit for certain projects. And they don't necessarily need a blockchain unless they're trying to do something with consensus, unless they're trying to do something with 2 parties that aren't potentially trusted. Not to say that you can't have permissioned blockchains and operate within an internal network. You absolutely can.
Of course.
I think there's a lot of use cases for that, but ultimately right now, a lot of these projects are public-facing databases.
Yep. And I think I'm very positive on decentralization as well. That's why I work in this space. But I do think that if your use case is, I want to write 3 terabytes of data that is private, but I want it to be publicly verifiable, then it's like, okay, so if we use a private chain, then we can essentially 51% attack ourselves, and that then makes it less verifiable. If we use a public chain, then your 3 terabytes of data, I hope you have trillions of dollars for all those fees.
Yeah.
If we, it just kind of, no matter how you cut it, when they start talking about that particular sweet spot they want to land in, it's like this data shouldn't live in a blockchain. We might be able to store the data in a database and hash it and put that on a blockchain. But then, what we're doing is basically proving that we had a record at a point in time. And that's very different than storing everything. So.
And ultimately, at this point, a lot of people probably don't realize that it's metadata that you're storing typically on the blockchain. It's not necessarily that you're, putting that funny cat video or picture on the blockchain itself. It's that you're potentially storing, hey, we've got this funny cat video and it exists here. So maybe that's the data you're storing on the blockchain, is just a record of where that data might be stored, and not necessarily having the entire, several megabyte or whatever cat video on your blockchain.
Yep.
That would probably be a poor use of blockchain to upload cat videos. So,
although I'm sure somebody will do it.
Yeah. Well, I guess CryptoKitties, that was that obviously that had a use case. They had their moment. So, but they didn't figure out how to animate them, which they could have. And that kind of disappointed me. But
all right, they'll just have to do a 2.0. I bet they're working on it now.
Well, they raised a ton of money too. They went and got a venture capital round now, and we'll see what they do next.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's very interesting about blockchain is, even if the data you're trying to store on it is really well suited, and you're just doing checks and hashes and metadata, the other thing that always continues to come up is who's your oracle. So who's putting the data on the blockchain to cause things to happen. If you've got a smart contract that does X when Y happens, then who's the one that says Y has happened? And you get into a lot of very interesting decentralization/centralization questions in that approach. Even if you have a fully decentralized autonomous system, if it requires a data point to be supplied from something outside of the blockchain, then all of a sudden you have to trust somebody, or you have to set up your own decentralized way of obtaining that data point, which is not easy. You need a lot of people working on that problem to make it properly decentralized.
Yeah, and this is why most projects are actually hybrid projects. So they'll have a component of their software stack that's fully centralized, and then they'll have a component of it that's decentralized, and then potentially leveraging blockchain. So I've seen that a lot, is projects that are trying to get something to market today. They're taking that hybrid approach. And I mean, there's no reason why you wouldn't take that approach at this point, unless you're trying to create the next Ethereum or something, which is fine too. But you're going to need a lot more developers than, to be able to pull off what they've built with that community now.
For sure.
So getting back to what you're working on, can you tell us a little bit about these 2 ICOs that you're working on now, and some of the challenges and some of the what are you going through with these 2 projects?
Yeah, so I'll start with Hayden. They've already done ICO, so they successfully they sold out of their cap. They're based here in Sydney, in Australia, and it is a stable coin. And the idea is that we should back the value of the stable coin with another cryptocurrency. So what has happened for decades has been, back in the gold standard, government said, here are my dollars, and they're backed by this value that I have locked up in Fort Knox somewhere, and it's just a giant pile of gold. And if you give me $1, I'll give you this amount of gold. And that proved to people that it was worth what they said it was worth. In the 50s, we got rid of that gold standard. I'm pretty sure it was the 50s. But what we've kind of done is we've got a few stable coins that are backed by some value that isn't directly accessible by the community. So for example, Tether is definitely backed by something that we know that it's backed by something, but I still personally haven't been convinced of the auditing that's been done that
Yeah.
it's backed by $1 for every tether.
Supposed to be backed by $1 for every tether that exists.
Yeah, yeah, that's the
But
idea.
whether or not they have a Fort Knox with those dollars is a whole other question. Because
Yeah,
it could be funds of funds of funds, and there could be a
yeah,
whole intertwining of how they come to that conclusion and make that
yeah.
promise.
Yeah, and it would be fairly easy to say, okay, here's where it is, and reveal that to an accounting firm. But I think that for whatever reason that hasn't happened yet, and so the idea with Haven is we can do the same thing, but instead of backing it with $1, we can back it with another cryptocurrency, and that suddenly gives us an amount of flexibility we didn't have when things were backed
Mhm.
with straight up dollars. It means we need to maintain a collateralization ratio that isn't 1-to-1. So if you say every tether's backed with $1, you don't expect the dollar to change with respect to the dollar. It's always going to be $1. So they don't need to worry about value fluctuations in that backing store. We do. So there's a collateralization ratio on that, which means that we're only issuing one stablecoin for every $5 worth of actual havens that we hold. But it means that everything is completely auditable at all times because it's all out on the blockchain. So everybody can see exactly what's been issued, exactly what's been staked, and people that have this value that they put forward for the stablecoin to be created get paid for doing that via the fees that get generated on the network while that's happening. So it's a pretty interesting project. Some pretty complex Solidity. It's some of the most complex Solidity we worked on.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's been a lot of fun as a problem
So,
to
a couple
tackle.
questions. So if you're backing the coin in another crypto, so could this be any crypto? So this could be another crypto that's maybe more volatile, or you could also have it, or could it also be another crypto like another ERC20 token that's like backing like real estate or like some other kind of more stable investment type?
So the idea is that we'll release multiple stablecoins. So there's an NUSD right now, which is obviously the US dollar stablecoin. That's backed with havens. So havens are the second currency. And the idea is that store of value will be able to back stablecoins across multiple fiat currencies. So you would be able to
Okay.
take your US dollar stablecoin and convert it to a Euro stablecoin or an Australian dollar stablecoin. And that could introduce some very interesting multinational multi-currency solutions, particularly because since they're ERC20 tokens, you can actually write them into smart contracts as well. So we
Hmm.
feel really strongly that people will get a lot of value for being able to build smart contracts that operate with what is effectively a dollar directly without having to worry about the fluctuation. But underneath that whole system is the one haven. We have designed it in such a way that it will work cross-chain. So we'll be able to, right now it's only on Ethereum, but we'll be able to have that store of value spread across multiple blockchains. And that then allows you to take your in USD on Ethereum and move across to EOS or wherever you want to go with it. So that's the grand plan.
Nice. And
Yeah.
what's the other project? I know you couldn't release too many details, but can you give us some clues?
Yeah. So basically, they are working on data sovereignty for health data. They're based here in Australia. They're trying to. We have a big scandal here in Australia at the moment. I don't know. Scandal's probably too harsh a word. The government's trying to come out with a system where they're going to centralize your health records into a big juicy database that somebody's going to totally crack at some point because that's how the world works. And they're saying that everybody gets a record unless you opt out, and the opt-out period started yesterday. So it's actually a really good time to be working on a thing like this. But the idea is that people should be able to hold their own data, but we should be able to prove that they haven't altered it while they've had it. So
Hmm.
that's where blockchain's coming in quite a bit. And then obviously some people want to pay for access to that data. So for example, medical researchers want access to people. And in order to do that, they often have to pay hefty recruitment fees. We could allow them to find those people and get access to their data with their permission, obviously, via the blockchain and via an application. So That's the other project.
I literally used to do that. I worked for a medical research company about 8 years ago, and helped them in the recruiting department trying to find patients for medical research studies.
There you
So
are.
yeah, it's a real challenge. Finding people, getting access to that data, dealing with HIPAA compliance, at least here in the United States. There's tons of regulations about the privacy of that data. And then even with all the regulations, all the hospitals, all the major healthcare companies have all been hacked.
Mm,
So even though we have really strict data compliancy and all these regulations to try and protect data, problem is they're putting it all in centralized soloed servers that
yeah,
are that unfortunately people are just figuring out how to get into them and steal the data. So yeah, I mean it's bad, but the blockchain does potentially solve a problem for that. I was just doing another interview for the show and was just talking about a solution where someone's developing one on the blockchain for being able to solve at least some of the security issues around this. But it sounds like a fascinating project, and it definitely aligns with some of the other projects that I've seen in the space as well. Especially the idea of being able to have a marketplace around that data afterwards.
mm,
Because that's one of the things that's kind of missing from like these centralized systems is, if you're using Twitter or Facebook or, some of these centralized social networks, for example, your data just kind of goes into a black hole, and,
yeah,
they're selling your data for money, and they're making money off of it, but you can't actually put that data in a marketplace and then get some of that money in return. So there's
yeah,
no revenue sharing or anything like that happens, even though it's your data. So the blockchain can actually enable that. That's what is so cool. And that's what I love about blockchain tech as a whole is that, at the end of the day, once more and more solutions are running on the blockchain, it's going to enable a whole different set of marketplaces online for a wide variety of different data and different use cases so that you could get paid for actually using a computer, supplying your GPS data, your social media data, and do so possibly in a way that's anonymized as well. So you're not having to sacrifice your personal privacy.
for sure. And with medical data, of course, there's a whole bunch of challenges around. It's pretty easy to de-anonymize people based on
Mm,
specific events and their history and so on. So we're approaching that very carefully, but we really feel strongly that it's a place where we add a lot of value with blockchain and with medical records. And we're starting in Australia, but obviously it's a worldwide problem. So
nice. So given the fact that you've been working on all these ICOs and you're also on the development side, what other kinds of projects, what other kind of opportunities, what else are you kind of seeing from this space?
there's a lot of people who I would grade projects on a scale. Basically, there's a lot of people who kind of say blockchain plus thing equals idea,
Mm,
and then that's where people usually start, and then from there you can build on up. So most recently, we've been seeing a lot of activity in the fintech space. A lot of people who are approaching us wanting to integrate various cryptocurrencies into more on and off ramps for people. Adoption is still quite low. Still pretty much nerds in this space. If you're not a programmer, technical person, you probably have some technical bent. My mother does get ETH from me, and that took a lot of work, but that's how I send her money when I send money back to the States. And so, yeah, I think there's a very passionate group of people, but we still haven't reached mainstream adoption by any stretch. So a lot of projects in just trying to make it easier to get on and off ramps happening where your fiat goes in and your crypto comes out, or the other way around, using ATM networks, using various retail locations, etc. So that's another big area we're seeing a lot of activity.
very cool. Yeah, I'm seeing kind of something similar here in San Francisco in the Bay Area. There's a lot of institutional investors that are now really heavily looking at blockchain because they're seeing it as a fintech solution for all these problems with our banking system.
Yeah.
Because
Well, I'm really excited about just so right now, a lot of the solutions are very financially oriented, and that's natural. That's good. It's because it's a ledger in most cases. And so like that's money. But I'm really excited about the next step. And I think the next step for us is governance. So I see a lot of situations where let's say you're doing a startup and you've got some sort of governance structure in place. It would be quite beneficial in many cases to be able to prove that certain things happened when you said they did and how you said they did.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of that is coming as the next wave.
No, governance is going to be huge. I've done a couple episodes on decentralized autonomous organizations,
Mm,
and it's a fascinating it's a fascinating concept, because once we actually have the tech in place to be able to do this, we can actually, start to form better organizations, different forms of organizations, like we were just talking about with data and privacy and that kind of thing, being able to actually give everyone within a company a vote, have a say, have weighted decision makers, that kind of thing.
yeah,
So I agree, there's a huge value when it comes to governance and voting systems, and actually using the blockchain to help on the human side of things by creating consensus between people, rather than smart contracts creating consensus between themselves. So yeah, no, I definitely agree. That's going to be a huge space in the next probably 5 to 10 years. And
yeah,
like I said, I've done quite a few episodes on that, because it's almost philosophical when you start to get into the governance side of things,
yeah,
because you're not just talking about how do you solve this on a technical front, but you're also trying to solve it on a human level. So there has to be some kind of user interface and user interaction to make sure that whatever gets decided in the system actually gets reflected in reality.
yeah. And I think that if we have the way to show prove what we're doing, in many cases that would be a good thing. I'm a very strong believer in open source software. I've been working in that space for a long time, and I really would love to see more of our governance structures become open source structures
Mhm.
themselves. So rather than having kind of board meetings behind closed doors, it would be, I think, an improvement if you could at least inspect what was going on if you had an interest. I'm imagining a junior engineer starts at a Amazon or a Facebook or any one of those kind of companies, being able to look through and see what the company's decisions are. And I
Yeah.
think that'd be very interesting.
And to counter that point, there's a major challenge right now where people do go work for companies and they have no idea what decisions are being made above them, and they don't know what the company's actual values are and what they're actually working on.
Mm,
If you want to talk about data silos, go talk to anyone working for any of the major tech companies. By design, no one knows what anyone else is working on inside the company.
yeah,
um, and you've had backlashes like recently with Google. They had several government contracts where they were working on AI drone projects, and then several people within the company found out and I think some people might have even left the company
yeah.
because of this. So uh, you know it the funny thing is like, from an outsider's perspective who's been watching Google from the whole time, I was like, you realize they were funded with defense contractor money? Like, you've been working for the government pretty much the whole time.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a surprise that they have government contracts, because they were basically funded, and they've had connections to the U.S. government pretty much since day one. So,
Hmm.
but the majority of people don't know that, I guess. It's the same is mostly true of Facebook as well. They were also heavily funded at one point in time by defense contractors, credit card companies, um, anybody who could extract value out of the data that they were collecting on people, were their early investors. So same thing with Google. So it was just 10 years before Facebook.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I fully agree that having future organizations where there is transparency into what decisions the executive teams are making, and be able to see all the different projects that a company is working on, would be quite like hugely beneficial to those companies, even if they just want to keep that data internal. So maybe you have
Yeah.
to join that organization first to be able to get access. But I mean, that way a junior employee could come in and see, oh wow, like they're working on all these things I didn't know they were working on, and some of them interest me. now someone who just studied this in school could jump right in and provide value to the company, even though they might have been hired for a different position or another department or something like that. And now, they've got the ability to see, hey, this is what's actually happening here, and it can actually contribute to different teams. And then people will kind of gravitate towards the projects that they're best suited for, rather than being, put in a box since day one and kept in that box, which is how most companies operate these days.
Yeah. And I think we've seen this experiment play out on very large scale a number of times. And what continues to happen is central planning is really good at making the central planners believe it's working, but very bad at actually working. And so I'm in my own organization, I'm very mindful of that we need to give people the ability to self-direct and the ability to say, no, that project is not a thing I want to work on. Or, no, you're absolutely wrong, Kevin. Like, that's completely crazy. What are you talking about? And so I think the more systems we can have that kind of keep us in check as people, stops us from doing what we naturally do. And I think humans naturally want to kind of hold things close, and they'll share, but only really within their tribe. This not really this kind of transparency is seen as a very jarring thing to most people, especially at an organizational scale. And so I think the more companies that adopt the practices and technologies that help that happen, the more it will become a standard, and the more people will go, well, sure, you don't have to do that, but I'll go work for this other company that is, because I feel more included. I feel like I can steer the ship more. So.
Well, and the crazy thing is when you apply this also not to just companies, but also to other types of organizations. So you could create, a decentralized autonomous organization that has the motivation of reducing greenhouse emissions. You could create decentralized organizations that are focused on, a certain agenda or whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish. So, there's a infinite number of types of organizations that you could potentially organize this way. And then the decentralized element of it is so critical, so that you're not having to go to a set place to be able to participate into a larger community. So there's so many drawbacks of you have to physically be somewhere to attend an event and be able to get access to everyone there and be present essentially. But there's ways now potentially with blockchain tech that we're going to be able to actually build tools that you don't have to physically be in the same room to be able to participate in the same community.
For sure. And I one of my first jobs was in Nicaragua, helping locals learn how to use Linux to make thin client networks. So building really cheap networks for rural schools in Nicaragua. And that was funded by a co-op. And their big challenge was constantly just telling people they existed, getting funding from people to do things, and then showing people that, yeah, you gave us this amount of money, we started this business, and now it's self-sustaining. Their idea was always to go take that seed money, build a new business, and then let it sustain itself so that it didn't require constant funding, and then they'd go off and do the next one. So there's so many spaces there where that you'd be open to a much bigger audience if you were able to govern yourself in a transparent and open way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I fully agree. That's why blockchain really excites me, is because of what it's going to be able to do at a community level and reorganize how people operate and in a way that's more efficient. Because current systems at this point, they're legacy systems. I mean, our entire countries, entire banking systems, most of the infrastructure of which people operate is a legacy system that was designed 30 to 50 years ago, or maybe even sometimes older. So it's time to reboot our infrastructure and build new solutions that work better and make more sense and work in real time and not have to deal with all these bottlenecks and how to get things done.
Yeah. And I'm a realist at heart. I'm very, very passionate about the future of this technology. I still think there are going to be a lot of centralized organizations and places where this doesn't fit, and that's okay. I just want to bring it where it fits, and so that's really where I'm coming from. Is I think there's immense potential, and it's just about us being able to start. It takes one foot in front of the other. So start simple
It's
and
going
build
to take
up.
time. It's going to
Yeah.
take a lot of time. Like I can't predict the future, but I definitely see the, blockchain being at least a 10-year, type wave in terms of its potential, because it's an infrastructure play. And it takes that long to get foundational technologies in place and really get them to scale properly.
Mm.
And we're in the early infants, we're in the early days, we're in the infancy of blockchain right now. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens over the next couple of years, especially with all these ICOs getting funded, and the kinds of projects that you're working on. As those become a reality, the use cases get proven.
Yeah, I think the next 5-10 years are going to be great to watch, and that's why we started working in this space, is really just wanted to help bring that about.
Nice. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
So the only other thing I specifically haven't said so far is our URL is Coinage. It's coina.ge. And yeah, we're not based in Georgia, but it's just a nice way to put the word in the URL. And yeah, feel free to hit us up if you've got any further questions or want to chat with me more. I love engaging the community and talking about the future of the space.
What's the best way for people to contact you? Is there like a form on your website or an
Yeah,
email you want to present?
form on our
Okay.
website or hello@coina.ge is the main catch-all email. So
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on the show. It's been awesome having you, and very excited to hear about the projects you're working on.
yeah, it was great to chat. Thanks.
All right. Take care.